Right. Hello. Oh, got my washing in the corner. Look at that. Right then, I'm going to just get my notes up and then I will start this. The colour's a bit strange. Don't know if that's a little bit better. But it's hopefully what I'll say that will be helpful rather than the lighting and what's going on in the background. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about finding time for you because it's something that I think is really important and really an essential part of the process. And it's also something that since I've sort of worked with women in this age group over the past sort of, well, yeah, 4 years, I've noticed that this is something that people can really struggle with, and I would count myself as well in that as well. I think when we're younger, we're a lot better at prioritizing ourselves. You know, we don't have as many responsibilities that we accumulate when we get older. Our careers demand more of us as we get older. And I think we don't really notice that accumulation of stress, of pressure, of responsibility. And I mean, I was reminded of that boiling frog story with the idea of if you sort of put a frog in a pan of boiling water and turn the heat up slowly, it's pretty grim, but they don't really notice the temperature going up. Versus if you put a frog into a pan of water that's already boiling, it would jump straight back out again. And I think that's a sort of a very bit gruesome maybe, but quite a useful analogy with stress, because I do think and busyness is that it just sort of, the ratchet just sort of keeps turning very slowly and we don't notice for a long time. Our lives just get hard, more and more involved. And I do think that women can have a harder time with this, and not to say men don't at all, but I think women can do. And there's a couple of things that sort of maybe we're more susceptible to, or have more tendencies to. And that's, having that sort of real caring nature and being really worried about and caring about other people around us. There also can be the idea that we feel, we have people-pleasing tendencies. We think that's more important to make sure other people are happy rather than ourselves. We can also be extra conscientious. And, even in a workplace, the statistics that women have to work harder to prove ourselves, even if we're at the same level of our male counterparts. Or even now, I think increasingly, there's recognition that women in a workplace who are older, into that sort of middle-age, midlife type area, can have to work harder to prove ourselves than younger, more sort of trendy people. So I think there's an awful lot going on there that means that we, are focused on lots of other things apart from ourselves. And also another one is that women are quite often multitaskers. Now, is that because we are naturally or because we've had to be? But I think we can be really good at spinning lots of plates. And I know myself, for years, I was really proud of the fact that I was a multitasker. It was almost like baked into part of my identity that I could just do all these things overall. And I think when you do realize that you've got so capable of a lot, you can feel really proud of what you can achieve, but it can sort of bite you in the bum a bit as you get older. And things, and as I say, workload and responsibilities get on top of you a little bit. And also, I think it's something to do with the sort of tipping of the balance between too much work and not enough pleasure, but I'm going to come back onto that in a minute. Now, something as well, just I wanted to raise, and this again, it's just something I've noticed with working with people over the years. I think sometimes we can really struggle with the idea of doing nothing. So even when we do find ourselves at a loose end, and potentially with time that we can do, that we can spend on ourselves, we can quite often look for other things to keep us busy. And, I would like meddle in, make myself busy by meddling in Tim's stuff or Lucia's stuff. So it's quite interesting, really. And I've seen that happen so many other times. And it's almost like sometimes I can sense there's a little bit of discomfort about, actually, I could do something for myself this time, but you don't feel very comfortable in going to that place. And, almost like we're a little bit scared of opening the Pandora's box and seeing what's in there if we sort of start sort of spending time on ourselves. Or maybe there's just a guilt that we shouldn't be doing that. I don't know. I'm sure everyone's different as well, but I think it's just worth me sharing that that's something that I've seen over time, because again, it's worth just being mindful of it and seeing if any of these things resonate at all. So there can be a lot going on, and And I think the net effect of that is that it can become really hard for us to pull back from all of our responsibilities, or this sense of that we should always be doing something, and that something should always be for someone else, or to keep the house organized. But we actually do need to make some space in our lives to make the changes that we're working on with this program. Okay. And that can be really challenging for us to do. Now, the good news, because I want there to be good news, is that we don't actually need to find a lot of time for this to have some benefit to us, and quite a lot of benefit as well. And in fact, focusing on carving out tiny moments in our days can actually be really beneficial and can have a huge impact. And I'm going to come on to some of those things, give you some practical ideas at the end. But first of all, I wanted to have a recap on why it is so important that we do find that time, because it's all very well and good me saying that, but what do we need that time for? So this is how I see it. I mean, I'm going to start by talking about maybe what the most obvious one is, and the one that we maybe talk about more often in the group, and that's meal planning. Okay, and I think that is really important. Probably no surprise there, and I don't want to talk about that too much because it is something that we cover off quite a lot. And having that plan is important. There's different ways to approach it. I think the group's been really useful to see that there can be flexible, that there is flexibility if we prefer. Or you can have quite a rigid plan. It doesn't really matter. It's about what works for you. And that is really useful, because it just means that it just sorts out a whole load of thinking for ourselves and takes a whole load of decision making out of our week, because we're acknowledging that we have got busy, stressful weeks. So if we can almost take the work out of that by having that meal plan in advance, and we know that meal plan, because we've sort of spent some time on it, follows a certain shape in terms of making sure we're eating enough protein and we're filling ourselves up properly. That means that we just sort of can tick all that off in one go, and that has huge benefits throughout the week as we go through it. Excuse me. Feel really sniffly this week. But that's one thing, and I think we're all aware of that by now. So next thing is about having the time to start to learn about your habits and the triggers, the things that sort of trigger you. And I'm talking about your eating habits there. And that might be what happens, what your default is if you don't plan, for example, or how stressful weeks affect you, or I don't know, just work when work, goes through the roof, or you're tired, or you're ill, or you have some sort of setback. It's really important that we're open to sort of doing this bit of work where we're looking to sort of understand what the patterns are that we fall into. And it's not about judging ourselves. In fact, it's definitely not about judging ourselves. It's about just being open to becoming more aware of what our little MO is around food, but also to be able to reflect on situations where that's happened so that we can learn from them. And so much of what I put into this, into the coaching and to the work that I do with you all as individuals, has come from me doing this myself, me being able to sort of recognize when I'm, eating in the wrong way, or when my diet sort of just goes to pot, or when I really feel out of control. There's always been a point where I've been able to sort of take some time out and just try and work out what's gone on. So that's a process in itself, to stop giving yourself a hard time when you struggle, and actually then start to get curious and ask yourself some questions about what's going on and why. Because once you have that awareness of what those habits are, you're going to be, the likelihood is you'll repeat those over and over and again. You might not have noticed that, but you'll have the same types of habits and patterns and reactions to the same types of triggers that come up in your life over and over again. And I don't know if any of you have read the book that I wrote, but that was really, again, my observation of not just myself, but working with a lot of women over a relatively short period of time. And again, seeing the same things come up over and over and over again for them. So we all think this is a normal phenomenon, that we all think that our own situation is unique. And if we find something hard, it's just something special about us. And it actually isn't. People have those same characteristics and follow those same patterns and struggle with the same things. And I've always found that really enlightening and really helpful, because it just was a first step of taking the blame away from me from struggling with things and being able to think, oh gosh, this is the thing. We're all doing this. So that's a key part of having that time, just so that you start to be able to observe yourself and how you behave in certain situations. And when you're able to do that and spot that, then the next thing you have to be able to do is have the time to work out some new strategies to cope with those triggers, or, you know, to be able to recognize the signs, pull back from them, and know what your new action plan needs to be, rather than going back to your default food related response that might have been what you've been doing for donkey's years and really didn't notice it. And you know, I'll give you some examples actually, hopefully, to make that a little bit clearer. So one of the things that I recognized with myself, and again, this was something that I did, that I put in the book, was there would be weeks where I was brilliant with my food, you know, still in my sort of diet mentality phase, where I was on a diet and I was keeping everything organized. And then by week 3, it would just all fall apart. And suddenly I just didn't have the ability to sort of pull myself together and get myself back on track, if you like. And one day would become another day, and I would be going into that sort of hole, blowing it now, I might as well have this, or I might as well finish that. Well, I might as well eat that as well while I'm there. And it just really quite an unpleasant situation when you just suddenly feel like you've done so well for so long, and then you just can't get your act together. And what I was able to do at some point, maybe I was a few days in, I can't remember how far into this cycle I was, it might have even been longer, and I just did actually have some time for myself, or made some time to sit back and say, okay, what's been going on? What's happened? And I was able to then sort of spot some triggers. And in this particular instance, then I'd been really sort of good with my food and really structured with my meals. And then I'd just got really busy and I hadn't made time to eat. So what I was doing was just sort of grabbing a little snack, a bit of cheese, a few oatcakes, a few nuts. And then the more I did that, the more I felt more hungry and more edgy. And then I sort of keep eating like that all day. So that by the time I would have got to my dinner time, I was full and annoyed with myself. But then because I was annoyed with myself, I still had my dinner. So the next day I'd be thinking, oh, I'm going to be on a diet tomorrow. I'm not going to eat anything. And then I'd be trying not to eat anything. And then before I knew it, I'm like, got my hand in a nut jar and chopping chunks of cheese off and eating crackers and butter. And this whole cycle started again. So what I realized was, it was when my workload increased and I wasn't making time for myself to make a proper meal, a proper breakfast, a proper lunch. And that was having this almost snowball effect of just creating this really bad cycle. Then what I was able to do, when I thought, oh, right, okay, I understand why I'm behaving like that now. Then what I was able to do was create a strategy for myself to get myself back onto this more solid eating pattern. And the strategy for that was, and I call it hitting the reset button, was to plan my meals for the next day. So I did it before the stress hit, before my workload went up, before I had no time to think properly. Plan my meals. I planned the time for my meals. So I thought, I'm going to have my breakfast at 7:30. I'm going to have my lunch at 1:00. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it doesn't matter. But I had this sort of structure throughout the day. And then my other thing was to go out for a walk first thing in the morning. And that was an amazing thing, that walk, because it almost put me back in control of my day in a really positive way. You know, you get some fresh air. I'd done something for myself before I'd opened my emails. I felt good about having moved around, you know, all the positive sort of exercise endorphins that we get. And then I had all the meals that I'd planned. And then when I started to feel hungry at maybe 12 o'clock, for example, I thought, well, I've only got to wait till 1 to have my dinner. So I'll just wait, because I'd almost made this commitment the day before, and it worked brilliantly. So that became a structure and a plan that I was able to execute anytime that I sort of let things slide from the planning point of view because of workload, and I'd recognize what had happened and why it had happened, and I was able to get myself back into the zone. And other things I'd noticed that had a similar effect was if I'd had a few nights of bad sleep for whatever reason, and I was sort of maybe starting on Monday and I'm feeling really tired, that would be something where I would again start to struggle with food. So when I was able to spot that, I was able to do things to make myself get better sleep or get an earlier night's sleep or have an afternoon nap or a bit of a rest. You know, there were things I was able to do because I started to recognize the things that were happening to me that then derailed my attempts to eat the way I wanted to eat, you know, and not just have these awful food habits of eating constantly and feeling like you're losing control. So that's where you need the time, because you need the time to do that. You need the time to reflect. For me, journaling is a huge tool because I can sit and write it down and work out the sense of that and then come out with a strategy. So that's why I feel like you have to protect a little bit of time for yourself as you go through this process to learn about that. Because one of the things that, you know, this is very much about is getting out of that, you know, not on a diet cycle that we've all been on for a long time, and just sort of find a way to have this sort of nice balance that you can live with that feels sustainable, you know, and you enjoy. And to do that, you have to, like I did, you know, I did 3 good weeks and then suddenly it all falls over. Yeah, that you're having to work out how to break that cycle for yourself. Okay. And that's key. So it's learning about you and shining a light onto those behaviors that you just don't really pay attention to very much. Okay. So that's one thing. Another thing that I, again, comes from recognizing about myself and also from clients that I see, is that something that I think is quite an interesting dynamic when it comes to food is that we have to find ways to relax and recover and reward ourselves from working so hard. Okay, so I know every one of you works your socks off and has a lot of responsibilities and deals with a lot of stress. It's, you know, we all can have very quite tough, pressured lives. And, you know, there's a mechanism in our brain that ties motivation into pleasure, because we have to feel that we get a reward from all the work that we put in. Because if we don't, well, our brain says, well, what's the point? There's nothing in it for me. We have to get that balance right. And I think what happens for a lot of us is pleasure becomes the food, because we squeeze our lives down, so we don't have an awful lot of time. And society gives us food at every angle, and therefore reward becomes the food, the sweets, the chocolate, the glass of wine that you sit down with at the end of the night. It can become the reward for all the hard work. And that's, if we just take away that wine or that chocolate at the end of the day, that can be a huge problem for people, because then you're asking them to change their life in a way that means they've suddenly pulled the reward away from quite intense, stressful lives. And then you're on a very short, you know, he's gonna fall over, basically. So, I mean, sometimes it's fine. Like, one of the reasons I encourage everyone to incorporate some treats into their diet, because I think that can play a really valuable role in giving us a reward if we like to relax at the end of the day with a cup of tea and a piece of chocolate, or we like to go out for a cake once a week. You know, it's really important that we allow ourselves to have those pleasures in our lives, because we don't get enough of them generally. But there's another thing that opening up little windows of time for yourself can do, is start to build in some little moments of pleasure and reward in your life that aren't just about food. Okay, so it's finding alternative rewards that balance out all the work that you do, that don't involve just eating and drinking, because it's a healthier mechanism to have, that you're able to find pleasure from a number of different things. Okay, so that's where time becomes really important as well. Now, next one. Other things that I have noticed, and again, this is something that's very true for me, is that emotional eating can be part of a big life stage transition. Now, that can be triggered by menopause. It could be the idea of becoming an empty nester, starting to plan retirement or think about life after your career, maybe even having a change of career. So this can be a time of life, a life stage, where there are things that sort of are coming to an end for us. Sometimes we're not quite ready for them to come to an end. They can be things that are out of our control. For example, our kids leaving home can be something that we're not ready for. If we're making a conscious decision to retire, that can be part of in our control. But it might put some question marks about, you're taking away something that, we're taking something away from our lives that we're very familiar and very comfortable with, and entering into or thinking about going into a new phase where we're definitely out of our comfort zone, or maybe we don't really know what that means for us or that holds for us at the moment. And I think that's, why I raised that, and I'll talk about my own experience, is that's something that it's been a huge impact, I think, on my eating over the past, not more recently, maybe the last couple of years, because as you get this sense of change, or the sense of, and it's probably to do with my daughter leaving home in a couple of years, to do with being an empty nester and what that means for me, it's quite uncomfortable, because my life's easy now in the sense that I just have to be at home and I want to be at home for my daughter, but there'll be a point when she's gone and like, where's that leave me? And I think that there's a emotional eating aspect that becomes attached to that, because there would be moments in the day where it's nothing to do with the amount of stress I might be under, but I just get a sense of feeling of change coming, if that makes sense, and change happening. And it's not a good feeling, because I don't know what that means, and I don't know what I want to do in my life now. And that's certainly been something that's manifested itself in me then subconsciously being in a kitchen cupboard or in the fridge and eating something. So I just wanted to flag that, because I know that may well be, again, something that resonates for people listening to this, because that's where we then need to get a little bit of headspace as well. And that means as in time for ourselves, because there's two aspects to that. There's maybe a bit of a thinking part, what's not right, what am I worried about, where am I thinking that, what do I want to change, what do I want to change to? There's a few things that we're going to have to work out when we're going through these transitions. And then there's a doing part as well. So trying out some different things, doing things that maybe push you out your comfort zone. For me, it's been a bit doing cycling and doing paddleboarding and doing walking, and they're just things of being out the house and doing things without my daughter and leaving her at home to a large extent. And that helps you discover what you do like, what you don't like, what would the next direction be from there? Where do I go from here? So we have to sort of maybe stop thinking and worrying and mulling things over and maybe eating because we're not getting anywhere with that thinking process, and actually then start to open our front doors, walk out and do some actions. And there's so many choices that we have to take. It can feel quite overwhelming, and we don't know, if I do this thing, will I like it? Will it be the right thing? It doesn't matter. The idea is that we go out and we can do things. We can try different activities, different groups, different hobbies, whatever those activities might be. But we're doing things that we're using as information to help us find out more about ourselves in terms of the transition that we might be going through, what we like, what we don't like, because what might be right for us now might be different, different to what has been right for us in the past. And we might be wanting to do new and different things. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. But that's why I talk about the idea of having some headspace for that and some time, because you've got to make some time to see, how do I get out of this feeling where there's some change going on in my life and I feel a little bit stuck and I feel a little bit frustrated. If we just sort of almost keep that feeling down by eating because we don't like the feeling and we're uncomfortable with it. So, it is a form of emotional eating that can be linked to a lifestyle transition, if that's something that we know we've done in the past and we've used food as an emotional response. They're the emotions that are happening in that situation, and we have to work out what they are, and we have to get out into the world and try and figure out what our next thing is. Okay, so some little things to talk about, because I always feel a bit conscious when I'm doing these things, is that I'm trying to take into account what everybody's circumstances are like, and that's not what's impossible to do, isn't it, at the end of the day? But the point being that I know people can have very full, stressful, intense lifestyles, So what I wanted to do was, focus on some of the small things that can make a big difference. And I have worked with clients on these types of things as well, just to help them find a little bit of space. And people with very intense lives, because we can carve out little moments for ourselves. And that sometimes can be a better way to think about it, rather than trying to think of making big changes or feeling that we just can't step away from some of our commitments, which, to a certain extent, we just can't. But small things that I think can make a huge difference are journaling, like I said, that can sit in like a morning or an evening routine, and that doesn't have to be anything other than 5 or 10 minutes. I get up in the morning, have a cup of tea, I get my journal out before anyone's up, and I just write. That's it. I mean, sometimes I don't do it, but mostly I'll go through phases of doing it and not doing it. I tend to do it when I need to do it, and I find it incredibly helpful. So that's something that might be useful for people. Another thing that's worked really well is thinking about less phone time. And because that's the thing, isn't it? We can feel that we're really busy, but we all have time to spend an embarrassing amount of times on our phones, and they are a real scourge. And that can be something that adds to that overwhelm and that stress in our minds as well. That's definitely something that I recognize. So trying to just sort of spend a little, turn off the phone, turn off notifications, and try and make some time to just put the phone down and do something else can be really useful, because I think the phone can, one, it does create a stress response, but I think it can lead us down lots of rabbit holes of what other people are doing and not doing, and lead into sort of have a few triggers, whereas I think you get your brain back if you turn your phone back off a little bit, and you can start to tune into you and what you want to do. So that can be really helpful, just to try and reduce that slightly. Mindfulness, meditation, they're nice things. And how they work really. And I did last year, I had like I had a meditation coach that I worked with for 9 months, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I'll admit to not doing an awful lot of meditation at the moment, but again, it's the sort of thing I feel like I do when I need it, and I don't when I don't. But it really helped me get some perspective and be able to sort of step back from things that are going on in my life. And rather than almost get consumed by them and feel overwhelmed by all the stuff that's happening, I could take a step back and just see the big picture and almost observe things happen, rather than being in the moment of it happening, if that makes sense. And that's really useful then, just to create some calmness and just to be able to control your reactions to things a little bit. And that's something that can really help. Then little bits of self-care go a really long way. Just taking time out to have like a nice bath or a face mask, or doing a little bit of skincare type routines, or if you can, going out for a massage or a facial, anything like that, that's like a gift to yourself, in the sense of like a reward and relaxation. Huge benefits if you can do it. And then of course there's craft and hobbies. So reading I would put under that as well, or anything creative that you can do that can help you switch off or discover things that you enjoy. Good one, not saying yes to everything. And this is something I've played around with a bit actually over the past couple of years. And I just sort of felt like there's things I just really don't want to do. And rather than feeling that sense of obligation all the time to say yes, actually just not. And not even apologizing for it, really, in the sense of you don't have to be apologizing to be wanting to protect your own time. Okay, so that's just something to throw out there, because when you start to get permission to do that, it can make you think, oh, I'm going to try this out and see what happens. And another one is, I do this with mixed success. If you're talking about my daughter, letting people wait, i.e., not literally as soon as they want something, whether it's a boss, whether it's a family member, jumping up and doing what they say and stopping what you're doing and letting people hang around and wait for you. That can actually be really powerful, because your time is important as anyone else's. And we can very easily be in this mindset that we have to stop everything as soon as someone asks something of us. And that's a way of us protecting our own time and protecting our space. And that can be, again, really nice and quite empowering. So there's quite a lot of small things that you can do that do make a big difference. And I did a podcast maybe last year, I think, and there was a great woman that I did some coaching with, and she was dead busy, and she was having a terrible menopause and had teenagers and ran a running group, and she, just someone who just had stuff coming out of her ears. And she just did tiny little things like giving herself time to read. And if her daughter wanted something while she's reading, she'd just be like, I'm reading. I've got my half hour on my phone, come back, which made me laugh. But she then found that she loved doing these little things for herself, and suddenly she was like, right, what else can I do? And she was on it, and it made a huge difference to her and how she was and happiness. And it was a really lovely thing to witness, actually. So don't underestimate the power of these little things. Once you realize that you have some agency and you can actually sort of start to carve out little bits of time, you do just think, now what can I do? So it's really about anything that takes us away from the day-to-day, the busyness, doing things for the people, things that just carve out small amounts of time just for us. And I know I'm sort of trying to stick to half an hour with these, and I've gone over a little bit, but the people that I have worked with over the years who find this really hard and don't actually embrace it and make some changes are the people who've actually struggled the most with changing their diets and changing their lifestyles. Because unless we make some space, we're trying to do more, and that really just doesn't work. And if you're in a situation where you have a busy and a stressful life, doing more work is not going to work. It's just not sustainable. So you have to find a way of making the space for you. And then you're starting to create it's not as superficial as just having to cook meals for yourself and find time for exercise. So if you're not prepared to take time out and just work out why this is so important to you and be open to changing the way you operate, then it just becomes another list of jobs to do, to cook, to meal plan, to exercise. And you don't get the value from that. You don't get the satisfaction from that. So that's why it's so important, if you want to be successful in this and make these changes that you can stick with and live with for your life, that you do those little things to find the time for yourself and just really sort of understand what you're trying to change and why. So hope that's helpful. Always, if anyone ever needs any extra chats on the back of any of these, if it brings something up that you'd like to talk through in a one-to-one, then I'll put the link below to book a call in, and we can have a chat. All right, then I'll go and take my washing off for the next one. It's been there for 2 days. All right, then, see you soon. Bye.